Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 122, and today's spotlight goes to El Loco, the 7th studio album from, of course, ZZ Top. Now, I know this is not the album that I had originally planned for today's episode, because I had announced originally what was going to be this episode's album again on last week's episode, which was episode number 121, which was a spotlight on Marauder from Blackfoot. And then of course I pretty much announced the same album, of course, too, on episode number 18 of the Nasty Metal podcast. But obviously the more thought that I put into it, and since of course due to the passing of Dusty Hill, and since looking on when this album was released, and since we were still at least we were in the month of July, and I never had it planned to really be at least a Album of the Week episode, especially on its anniversary. But, you know, again, because of the passing of Dusty Hill, I decided to at least spotlight this album. Even though this ain't my favorite album from ZZ Top, you know what? Since I kind of revisited this album last night before doing this episode, you know what? I pretty much just felt like just changing it up for this one. So again, this is all at least out of the honor and out of the respect, and just a tribute to Dusty Hill of ZZ Top. So here we go, El Loco. Again, I don't really need to say anything else. I mean, also I should point out that this is now the second ZZ Top album that I've actually covering on this channel, especially as a album of the week, because the first one was 6 months ago, which was for the ZZ Top's very first album, which again was just titled First Album. So that was a album of the week episode for this year, but now this is the second one. So just great all in all, though. It's very cool. So let's definitely get into it, though. So El Loco. Alright, so this one, of course, comes off the heel of their major label debut, because originally they were under London Records for at least the first half of the 70s. Basically from their very first album to Tejas. Texas. So that 5-album run through the 70s on London Records. I mean, from the first album to Rio Grande Mud to Tres Hombres, and then of course Fandango, the half live, half studio album, and of course Tejas. I mean, talk about a very good run of classic, just straight up heavy Texas blues rock albums. Just good albums all around. But Duguelo was marked the beginning of their major label debut, just their relationship with Warner Brothers. Even though they were still, at least, were part of Lone Wolf Productions, still, this was the beginning of them just being on a really major label, and Duguelo was the album that really kicked that off. So coming off the heels of that album, which actually had charted at number 24 in the United States, on the Billboard 200, and then of course charting at number 100 actually here for the Kent Music Report in Australia. So talk about a very overall pivotal turn, or I would say, yeah, a bit of a tide turn for ZZ Top with Duguelo. Even though that album, which again I spun that was the first album I actually had spun on when Dusty Hill had passed away on that day. I just decided to just spin Duguelo, and it still is a very good album. It is probably for me personally, that does feel like that was the true last album of course that just straight up down to earth heavy Texas blues sound, even though it was a lot more just a little bit more, I guess, slightly more matured up a bit. I don't know, it was a little more, I guess, cleaned up a little bit, but it still had a lot of great sort of dirt and grit and everything to that album. It still had a lot of that sort of sound, but you can tell that they were going to go on a more more melodic, more very, I guess more mainstream commercial direction, but it still had a very that still classic, heavy sort of raw Texas blues rock sound. But everything just comes here into really that the evolution that was kind of beginning with DeGuello really even more takes fold on this one. The evolution is really heard on this album, El Loco. So let's definitely get into El Loco here, which again was recorded at least it's not really stated what studio it was recorded at, but it might have been from the same studio, whatever that Bill Ham at least had put together, or at least he ran, That's where in 1981, and of course then being released on July 20th of 1981, again being produced by Bill Ham, who had been producing their album since, again, the first album. So here we go, El Loco. So with this album, we have at least about 10 songs here, and it all clocks in at 36 minutes and 49 seconds. So these 10 songs are, it already begins with a pretty much a radio staple to this day, that being Tube Snake Boogie, then to I Want to Drive You Home, 10-Foot Pole, Lila, Don't Tease Me, It's So Hard, Pearl Necklace, another radio and concert staple for them. It was a concert staple. And then a groovy little hippie pad, Heaven, Hell, or Houston, and then Party on the Patio. So there you go. There's your 10 songs. And with this album, this really was the really, you can hear the evolution. It's like, while DeGuello was definitely a transitional album, this album is even more of a transition from the sort of real, their classic trademark Texas heavy blues sound to the more commercial, very just the mainstream hit of Eliminator, and then of course into like Afterburner and Recycler. This is the album that really kind of it's the missing link between of course the classic sound, the classic traditional sound, and of course Eliminator. So this was the missing link between that. Again, this is still a naturally recorded album. It's definitely still, again, it has some of those sort of classic trademark Texas heavy blues rock sound and songs like, like with the boogie rocker that is Tube Snake Boogie, then into other tracks like even Pearl Necklace and Party on That Patio. You still get a little bit of, even It's So Hard kind of plays around with that too. So Don't Tease Me, I Want to Drive You Home too. And I Want to Drive You Home, of course, is a very slow blues number, very much in sort of very similar to some of the stuff off of DeGuello. So it still kind of plays, even Tejas, it still kind of plays around with that, but it still is a very good track. But you still get plenty, again, of the sort of classic boogie rockers. Again, Tube Snake Boogie and Pearl Necklace are just great catchy rockers. I really do dig those. Again, I've seen them play Pearl Necklace as well. Fucking Billy Gibbons, I think, ran into some really funny shit, though, when he was some sort of little just because it's funny. His bantering, his stage bantering is just absolutely hilarious most of the fucking time. He's definitely a showman in his own right, and he definitely came up with a real funny little, very, though, tongue-in-cheek fucking story before going into Pearl Necklace that I remember when I had seen them 2 decades ago. It was 2004 at the Fresno Fair. Definitely a memory of mine for sure. But so it's just all good though, nonetheless. But the thing that is interesting is that this album does experiment. This really does experiment with a lot of really interesting stuff, especially in songs like 10-Foot Pole, Groovy Little Hippie Pad, and Heaven, Hell, or Houston are just so different. You really can tell they were starting to really experiment more and more. You kind of heard it a little bit on DeGuello, especially with the song like Maniac Mechanic. But the experimentation on this album is a lot. It's this kind of it's it's really not. To kind of say that this is kind of already you're beginning to hear the sort of sounds of Eliminator, is I still feel it's kind of a stretch because of Eliminator was more really influenced a lot. It's like while that one was like the beginning, sort of almost the sort of real early mixture between a very like electronic drums and hard rock music, basically, or AOR. That was like the first to do that, but this album is not so much. This album is like almost mixing more so like very new wave or industrial, really, I guess you say maybe early sort of weird, the industrial kind of sounds with almost sort of blues rock stuff. And that's really heard with songs like either 10-Foot Pole or especially Groovy Little Hippie Pad, which I'll actually elaborate more on and its sort of backstory. But with a lot of these, it's so different. And within Heaven, Hell, or Houston, all these are just so really different. It's like it's unique. And at first, the reason, and it's one of the reasons why it kept me a lot, though, again, some of these songs are the reason why it kept me from really liking this album. Because the first time I heard El Loco, it's like, while I enjoyed some of the songs on this one, there was a lot, again, it was just kind of just odd and weird to me at the time when I first heard this album, because it just didn't register as much. It just didn't hit me as much as with the early material, or even at times Recycler and Eliminator. You know, it just didn't hit me the same way. So this sound, it was just had a really different feel, and it kept me from really appreciating it. But again, I'm giving it a re-listen just before recording this. I've now come to realization that I think these songs are really interesting, and now I actually can appreciate these for what they are. It's a really weird experiment, but again, you can tell that these had to have been really influential on that sort of really eccentric crowd that was definitely that wanted to take musical stuff, just the whole evolution, and really take it to different heights with like the industrial bands, especially like Ministry. I think, for example, a lot of them were just wanted to. It influenced them to where they wanted to take things different, just really expand more on the sort of just the blueprint of it. So you really can hear something different, and it's just interesting. But Groovy Little Hippie Pad, I'll definitely, but before I really go into the sort of the weird, just the unique vibe of this track, let's get into, of course, the backstory. Because it's all being told by Billy Gibbons here, since, of course, I'm looking on Wikipedia. They got his interview here, where he talks about how he had befriended somebody who, again, would become an influential part of their their career, their sound, in re-evolutionizing them in the 1980s. And that's where he names the guy, that being Lennon Hudson. He was, again, he goes on and says that how he was a gifted songwriter, but he was the one that brought in a lot of the elements that you ended up with hearing in the stuff like this album, and then, of course, in the Eliminator and Afterburner, and I think even to like Recycler, where it's like the elements that he brought into ZZ Top really reshaped their sound, and even, I guess you say, made them fucking millionaires or billionaires. It made them fucking money. So he's the one that brought in a lot of like the synthesizers, a lot of that, and that was becoming so big with a lot of the overall new wave stuff of the period. But it's really heard in Groovy Little Hippie Pad, where he's the one that brought in a lot of the synthesizers and stuff. It was his sound. But, of course, it's also that Billy Gibbons has definitely went on where he definitely cited, of course, Devo as probably the biggest influence on, basically on really coming up with the sound and the overall concept of the track, Groovy Little Hippie Pad. And I can hear the Devo influence in this track, because it's just so out there with its sound. It's so fucking out there. But at the time when I first heard this track, I didn't really appreciate it for what it was, but now I actually can appreciate the track for what it is. So it's a really unique thing, and it definitely showed how ZZ Top were definitely able to experiment. While they got a lot of flack for it, because you know, while some folks will say how one trick pony AC/DC gone free because they always stuck with the same formula over years, but you can tell that this is still that sort of same crowd that likes probably bands like AC/DC because they didn't want ZZ Top to really change up a formula that already worked for them, but at the same time, you can, I guess in some ways, it wasn't, I guess, because again, obviously they wanted to still make some money. They still wanted to see a lot of success, and it wasn't a whole, I guess in many ways, Billy Gibbons definitely and the crew wanted to kind of change up a little bit. They wanted to kind of experiment and really see what they can do and see if maybe it might change the tides a bit, and in terms of their success. And obviously you can tell with this album, this was kind of that album that really experimented. It was the album where let's see what we can try and do. We still got our trademark Texas heavy blues sound, but let's see what we can do and maybe experimenting it and see what comes out of it. It might come out shit, or it might end up becoming revolutionary. And obviously, with this album, it may not have been a huge fucking hit maybe for them, even though it gave them two big hits in like Pearl Necklace and Tube Snake Boogie, which again are concert staples for them. Still, this was the album that really kind of, where they began to really kind of loosen up a little bit by the writing instead of just tightening up a little bit and staying in one sort of tight spot where they're only going to be stuck to doing maybe half the same things. They kind of really changed it up a little bit, see what they can do with it. And this was the album that really kind of led way to, of course, the absolute monster hit that became Eliminator. But this album still had, instead of, again, that album really was even more of an evolution, and Billy Gibbons really experimenting with their core sound by adding in more it was like more state-of-the-art, basically. State-of-the-art kind of sound, where really adding in like electric drums and electric bass guitars and whatnot. Really just kind of doing something completely different for their stuff. I guess you could say really overly simplifying it a bit, even though they were simplified to begin with. But just really making something that's just different, though, at the same time. Still simple, but yet very unique in its own way. But this album, it wasn't much like that. Instead, they still had a lot of natural drumming and a lot of Dusty Hill's trademark bass tone, and Frank Beard's just a straight up simple, but yet still hard hitting drumming. You still got a lot of that. A lot of great guitar work still from Billy Gibbons, and still some great vocals. Dusty Hill at least provides two vocal tracks to this album. He does provide, he does kind of do some, I think here and there, trade off some vocals with Billy on Don't Tease Me. But for sure on Party on the Patio, that's all Dusty Hill. That's all his vocals. And again, a great singer too. He was easily just as good as Billy Gibbons. It really showed the dynamic in ZZ Top's sound. They were just, instead of just being a typical sort of Texas rhythm and blues three-piece band, they really wanted to kind of be different a bit, where each member at least had vocals to add in. I mean, the Beatles may have been one of the first to kind of be a four-piece and provide all vocals, but ZZ Top might have been one of the earliest sort of three-pieces where at least two of the main members at least still sung, though once in a while Frank Beard, I think, did provide some vocals here and there to some of the songs, but for the most part, Dusty Hill and Billy Gibbons were easily the two key vocalists and for ZZ Top. Just one of the key ingredients to at least that sort of to ZZ Top's core sound, and this sound still has a lot of that. So this has still got a lot of the still classic sound, but you can tell they're experimenting. Of course, Lila is definitely one of the soul ballads of this one, but it's a slow blues ballad. And again, Billy Gibbons definitely provides the vocals, and he does a great fucking performance on here. So that's all I got to say about this one. I can go on and on about El Loco, but I think it's best to just keep it right here. So there it is. So there we go. This album, of course, would do well for them. Of course, it actually would reach number 17 on the Billboard 200 chart here in the United States, and of course, in the United Kingdom, it would actually reach number 88 on the official for the official charts company. But it was a bit higher than Degüello. So it was starting, you really can see that the tides were changing for them in the charts, and obviously the tour for this album would be a big one for them too. So there we go. So talk about a pivotal turn that would lead in to, of course, the even bigger album for them, that being Eliminator, and the rest is basically history. But yes, there we go. This is all was done at a tribute to, of course, Dusty Hill. Again, ZZ Top were definitely were one of those gateway bands for me as a kid, and still, though this day, they are definitely a big main staple of my influence and just my overall tastes in music. They definitely were one of those bigger parts of my childhood, and I still love these guys to this day. So, just paying tribute to one. So, spotlighting an album that would lead into the evolution and the overall the bigger success for ZZ Top. So this sound was definitely, to me, it is the missing link. But it has reached its 40th anniversary. So again, overall celebration to a album that really, again, it would play a part in evolution, just re-evolutioning or just reshaping basically their sound. It would just reshape ZZ Top and just make them the overall hits that they are to this day. So so definitely it's worthy of celebration. It's worthy of spotlighting. So there we go. Again, 40 years old. If you were there when this album came out, if you didn't like it when it first came out, but you liked it now, you can leave those comments in the comments section below. But if you at one point liked it then, but don't care much for it now, again, you know what to do. You can leave those comments in this comment section below, but it doesn't matter. Whatever your thoughts are, whether they be negative or positive, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you haven't heard El Loco from ZZ Top, and are also, since you heard about the news, of course, of the passing of Dusty Hill, and are trying to look for albums, because since you probably have never heard, maybe you might have heard some of their songs on the radio, but you're trying to look for something to kind of at least just to give listen to, because you want to at least out of respect and for tribute, and want to try and check out a ZZ Top album. I guess this wouldn't be too bad of an album, even though it's very different, it's very interesting, but it is one of the albums that really marked a change. It really was one of those that really added to the evolution of, that really reshaped their sound to what have become, what everyone remembers today now. It seems like from every bit of the 80s kids of the period that grew up with an album like Eliminator, this is the album that really played a big part in really re-evolutionizing their sound, just reshaping it. So out of that, this is probably a reason of why you probably should kind of check out this album. But if you really want to check out a good, just good ZZ Top albums, this might be one of the last ones you might check out. But again, it's only one of those if you really want to kind of hear on where they would go from, or just everything that leads into Eliminator. This is one of those albums you definitely should check out. But anything before, there's always the classic stuff. You like the sort of classic sort of Texas rhythm and blues sound. Again, stuff or heavy rhythm and blues, you know, the early stuff is all good too. That's definitely all worth checking out. Either way, though, it's a classic band, and it's in many ways, I guess, to some, it might be seen as a classic album. So there we go. There it is. That's it, folks. Hope all of you enjoyed. Again, so yeah, rock and peace to Dusty Hill. So there we go. That's it. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I am out. I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.